Being too timid was far from the only gripe with his party. So during this conversation on the New York Times podcast, Gallego also spent a long time sharing his views on why the Democrats lost touch with everyday Americans and ended up losing so much, so poorly in the 2024 presidential election.
In this video, Anna Kasparian of the Young Turks reports yet again on the failing Democrat Party. Anna Kasparian plays a clip of a Democrat senator being interviewed and discussing why the Democrats keep losing. With that, let's watch Anna Kasparian rage about the fact that Democrats seem to have thrown in the towel.
The big question for Democrats is what it means to be an effective opposition party. And I think there are two issues here, right? One is what Democrats should actually do to counter Trump's actions. And the other is how you should communicate what you're doing.
We can't be afraid of failing. That's number one. I think that's the biggest mistake I've seen Democrats do, is that we're always afraid. We're always afraid of failing, so we don't take risks.
That was Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego speaking to the New York Times and sharing some pretty harsh criticisms about his Democratic colleagues and why it is that they're having so much difficulty serving as an opposition party, or honestly, these days, winning elections. And there's one particularly embarrassing insider detail about the Democrats that Gallego reveals that you do not want to miss. So stick around for that. But first, being too timid was far from the only gripe with his party. So during this conversation on the New York Times podcast, Gallego also spent a long time sharing his views on why the Democrats lost touch with everyday Americans and ended up losing so much, so poorly in the 2024 presidential election. Let's take a look.
The problem is, I think, we have to separate what we're hearing from kind of the DC crowd from what we're hearing kind of in the streets, from what we're hearing about everyday common Americans. Because, I go back to Arizona, they're actually not talking about USAID. And they're not talking about the courts. They're still talking about egg prices. They're still talking about the cost of everything. So one of the things we have to be very mindful of is that we may engage in a fight, but the rest of the American public may not be with us because they don't understand this fight. And we need to make sure that we're matching our politics to what actually is happening in the world, because sometimes when we have that disconnect, we miss, and then we miss really, really badly. And unfortunately, now we know we can't miss, because when we do, it has political fallout. Like the stuff that's happening right now is because we entirely missed where the American public was during the 2024 election.
If you like watching videos like this one, like and subscribe. We'd really appreciate it. Let's get back to the video.
Well, look, much like the Republicans in Congress, who, by the way, also have super low approval ratings, Democrats just don't talk to normal people. He's right about that. But at this point, Cenk, I don't even think Democrats are even capable of connecting with normal people. We're talking about multimillionaires. Okay, we're talking about people who live a completely different lifestyle from the vast majority of Americans, including their constituents. And look, you're an incumbent. More often than not, you're able to just ride, you're able to coast. You're the incumbent. And people just vote based on party lines. So if you're living in a blue state or a blue district, you're going to get reelected as the incumbent. You don't really have to go out of your way, to connect to ordinary everyday Americans. But that has this deteriorating effect on the party as a whole throughout the decades. And I think that's part of the reason why the Democrats find themselves in the position they're in right now. They don't understand ordinary Americans. They don't seem to care about workers. I've said this before, I'll say it again. They seem to almost loathe the Democratic base, meaning the voters, and they feel entitled to getting reelected. They feel entitled to Democratic voters literally doing the work for them to help them get elected and reelected. It's pathetic. So I largely agree with what Gallego is saying here. And look, a lot of them are too old. They need to retire. They need to make way for young, fresh, Democratic leadership, but they're unwilling to do that, and it makes me sick. So that's why the Democrats are losing. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Gallego is an interesting cat. He just became a senator, historically a little bit more progressive, a little bit of populist, etc. Had an interesting vote recently. Maybe we'll get to that on immigration. So his first thought on don't be afraid That's what the problem with the Democrats is. I totally agree. And I'm going to explain why the Democrats are so rudderless in a second. But it's absolutely true. They're like, okay, wait, is it poll tested? Did the consultants say it's okay? Did the donors say it's okay? I don't know what to. Do you have any opinions? Like, forget the polls and the consultants and stuff. Just like you, Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries, whoever. Do you actually hold any principles? Are you passionate about anything? So when Trump does something wrong.
Yes, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer do have ideas, and they are passionate about some things. They're passionate about power and money and how to accumulate more and more and more with the least amount of effort and by saying whatever they think people want to hear. And as far as Democrats having principles, a principled Democrat is an oxymoron. And I say this with zero levity. The vast majority of the leadership, the politicians, the media of the Democrat Party have zero principles. All joking aside, though, no, they don't have any opinions or ideas because they are rich fat cats. They can't relate to the American people, and they're used to coasting. And for a while, they were able to coast on, we hate Donald Trump, don't you? And now that strategy is not serving them that well. So they're shifting it to, okay, anything Donald Trump or the Republicans do, we're going to oppose, no matter how good it is for the country. And since they've put all their energy into strategies like those, they have zero ideas and zero policy proposals that will resonate with Americans. I mean, those strategies apparently did work because it got us 4 awful years with Joe Biden, but those strategies also led the American people back to Donald Trump. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
Or the American people are not getting something, higher wages, healthcare, etc. Does that bother you? Does that, make you angry? And we know the answer. No, they're all insipid, vanilla cutout, cardboard cutouts sent in by an assembly line of corporate donors. So they're not animated to begin with, let alone making mistakes. I make 100 mistakes. Why? Because I give a damn about things. So I just charge into fight. And when you charge into a fight, hopefully I've thought it through, and I'd like to think that most of the time that I have. But even so, you're going to make mistakes because you're taking action. But if you don't take any action, you won't make any mistakes, and that's why they're frozen. They're like deer in the headlights. So I disagree with him on one thing, Anna, which is, he says, okay, save your powder for just economic issues. Now that sounds like something that I would love, right? I'm a huge believer in economic populism overall. I agree with that as your focus. But I think you could at the same time say cutting cancer research was a bad idea. Cutting treatment for AIDS in Africa was a terrible idea. Cutting the water to get lead poisoning, the resources to get lead poisoning out of the water, terrible idea. And we could highlight those, we could talk about those while not being hysterical and not yelling Nazi at everything, right? And by the way, guys, there's a giant constitutional crisis coming if he doesn't listen to the courts. Do not cry wolf until there is an actual constitutional crisis, which by the way, might be days away. So if you cry, you can talk about, hey, why are we letting the lead back in the water without calling it a.
Cenk and Anna are right about most of what they're saying about how inept the Democrats are. But Cenk here is not being honest either. See, because Donald Trump's doing so well exposing waste, fraud, and abuse that inevitably some of the things he's cutting, while 99% of them are just frivolous, awful, wasteful things, some departments or some of the funds that go towards important things, like he's talking about taking the lead out of the water, cancer research, whatever, things that I think all people would agree are good uses of taxpayer money. They're trying to tug at the heartstrings of Americans and say, look what monsters the Republicans are. But the reality is, just because those funds were cut from some crappy department, we've got a billion other crappy departments out there that the administration can delegate important things to. So just because they cut a department or some wasteful spending that happened to have a small part of it that was going towards something good doesn't mean they're just ending cancer research or taking lead out of the water. Give me a break. And again, because if they were being honest, it's very, very hard to criticize an administration that's trying to root out corruption So they have to find very small things. You know, they need to look through everything they're cutting, go line by line, and see 1,000 amazing things that they're cutting, then find one small thing and exaggerate it and try to scare people. So while all Democrats are dishonest and lazy and rich, Cenk's being dishonest here too. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
Constitutional crisis, or without calling them Nazis or racists, right? But still be super adamant and passionate about that topic. So, but the reason why
center the people, center people,
yes,
rather than centering your hatred for the right wing
or
as your argument. That's all they do. That's literally all the Democrats do. All they do is talk about how dangerous Trump is, how bad Elon Musk is. I get it. Okay. But when they make those arguments, the way they come across is a bunch of elitist pricks who only care about their own power, only care about getting reelected, and they never center the best interests of the American people in any of the arguments they make. And that has been the case since at least 2016.
yeah,
Right? Like Trump bad is not only something that most Americans at this point are fatigued from hearing from Democrats. That argument has made them so rusty in being able to make compelling, persuasive arguments in regard to how they're going to serve the people. You get what I'm saying?
yeah. So why do they do Trump bad, Elon bad, like in place of things that would actually help the American people? Because they think, exactly to your point, Anna, they think it's me versus them. No, brother, it's who's going to serve the voters better. I know a Democrat hasn't thought that, other than Bernie Sanders, a couple other guys. They haven't thought that in decades. I mean, I wrote about this in my book, Justice is Coming. We lost these guys. They're a bunch of corporate goons now. So the idea of like, oh, well, I was attacking that guy because it was between me and him, and me. Oh, there's voters involved? Oh, where are they? Or are they below us? Where are they? But Anna, you center the voters 100% right. Instead, they're centering Trump or Musk because they view them as their opponents, or they're centering the donors, which gets to my major point here, which is the reason the Democrats don't know what to do is because of the story I did for you guys yesterday, where the donors have gone home. They're now
Cenk telling people not to yell Nazi after he did it for a year leading up to the election is so funny. He's like Captain Hindsight. Now he's a perfect strategist because he knows that failed miserably. By the way, you keep hearing him say constitutional crisis. You notice how you hear that same term from MSNBC, CNN, any other liberal commentator? You used to hear that term very rarely, if at all. But now you hear it every day because that's part of the narrative. That's part of the Democrat talking points they hand out in memos to all these idiots. And by the way, Donald Trump has said he will abide by what courts rule. So again, it's just more manipulation of the facts and the truth to try to scare people. I guess the question for the American people is going to be, are they going to be more happy about the fact that this administration is saving the taxpayers so much money and identifying the source of a lot of corruption that's going on in our government, as it has been forever while we all just stood by and no one did anything about it? Or are they going to be more scared from the Democrats lying and manipulation? But we want to hear from you. What do you all think about the messaging and the state of the Democrat Party? Let us know in the comments. Anyway, as always, really appreciate you watching, and we will see you on the next one.